The laughter around the Thanksgiving table froze in the air the moment my father's voice roared through the dining room. He stood at the head of the table like a king commanding servants, and his eyes locked on me with the cold certainty of someone used to obedience. I had just set the last plate of turkey slices on the oak table, my hands trembling slightly from the heat of the kitchen, when he ordered me to refill my brother's glass. The way he said it was not a request, not even a suggestion. It was an order, sharp and humiliating. My brother leaned back in his chair with a smirk of satisfaction, one hand resting on his stomach already bloated with food, the other tapping the rim of his empty glass. I could hear him snicker and mutter that I should move faster like a maid who was too slow to be useful. I looked at the crystal goblet in front of him, then at the smug tilt of his head, and for the first time in my life I let the word "no" slip out. The silence that followed felt like a storm pressing against the windows. I saw my aunt's fork freeze halfway to her mouth, my uncle cough nervously into his napkin, and my mother glance away, as if I had committed a crime too shameful to witness. My father's face darkened like a thundercloud. He slammed his fist against the table so hard the cutlery jumped and the cranberry sauce spilled onto the cloth. His voice shook the room. "What did you just say?" I said it again louder this time, though my chest was tight with fear. "I am not a maid. I will not serve him." The words tasted like fire on my tongue, dangerous and defiant. My brother's smirk twisted into mockery. "Hear that, Dad? She thinks she is too good to serve her own family." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, making sure the humiliation burned into me. My father rose from his chair with the heavy steps of a man about to deliver judgment. His belt was already in his hand before I realized what was happening. The sound of leather sliding free from his waistband was louder than the murmurs around the table. My pulse hammered in my ears. No one moved. No one spoke. My mother pressed her lips together and looked down at her plate as if the mashed potatoes had suddenly become the most fascinating thing in the world. And then the first strike came. The whip of leather cut across my back with a sound that split the air, and the pain was instant raw burning. I gasped and stumbled forward against the table, knocking over a wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood blooming from a wound. He struck again harder, each blow tearing through fabric and into flesh until I felt warm wetness seeping down my skin. I heard myself cry out, but it sounded distant, almost like another person screaming. My brother laughed and muttered that maybe now I would learn some respect. The words felt like knives. I searched the faces around the table for anyone at all who might defend me. My cousins looked away. My uncle cleared his throat, but said nothing. My mother closed her eyes, and still my father whipped me until my knees buckled, and I collapsed against the chair leg, trembling, humiliated, and bleeding. The only sound left in the room was my ragged breathing and the quiet drip of wine falling from the edge of the table onto the polished wooden floor. At that moment, lying bruised and broken in front of the very people who should have protected me, I realized something that cut deeper than any lash of the belt. I was not part of this family. I was their scapegoat, their servant, their sacrifice. And if I did not fight back, this Thanksgiving would not be the last time they destroyed me. I grew up in a house where silence was a weapon sharper than any blade, and obedience was the only currency that mattered. From as early as I can remember, my father carried himself like a ruler who expected his word to be law, and my mother moved around him like a shadow, careful never to step into the light of her own opinions. They both raised me with the message that my existence was useful only in service to others, especially to my older brother, who from birth was treated like the sun around which we all revolved. I was 5 when I first understood the difference between us. On his birthday, the living room overflowed with balloons, gifts, and guests, while mine was marked with a small cake baked from a boxed mix and a few reluctant smiles. At 8, I was scrubbing mud from his shoes while he watched cartoons, and my mother told me a good sister helps her brother shine. At 12, I wanted to join the soccer team, but my father said girls do not waste time chasing balls across fields, and instead I was forced to stay home to cook dinner for my brother after his practice. By 16, the unfairness had hardened into routine. My brother wrecked his car after a night of drinking, and somehow I was the one blamed for not reminding him to be careful. The insurance money was pulled from what had been my college savings, the account I had carefully built with scholarships and part-time jobs, and I was told it was my duty because family sacrifices for family. It was a phrase my father repeated often, but it always meant me sacrificing and my brother receiving. When I confronted my mother, she shook her head with weary eyes and said, "Your brother is the future of this family. You are just the helper who keeps things together." At school, teachers noticed the bruises, sometimes faint lines across my arms, or a stiffness in the way I walked after my father's belt left its mark, but when asked, I would smile and claim I had fallen or tripped. I had learned early that telling the truth only made the punishments worse. My father called it discipline. My mother called it teaching respect, but I knew it was cruelty dressed as tradition. My brother never bore a single mark. He strutted through life certain the world owed him comfort and respect because our parents had never taught him otherwise. If he failed a class, I was blamed for distracting him. If he lost a job, I was expected to help him rewrite his resume late into the night. If he demanded money, my father would look at me and bark that I should hand over whatever I had saved. Over time, the house itself seemed to whisper that I was unwanted. My bedroom was the smallest, tucked beside the laundry room, while my brother had the spacious one overlooking the yard. I washed dishes, vacuumed carpets, folded laundry, while my brother lounged on the couch, and my parents praised his potential. The irony was sharp. They celebrated potential in him while they crushed actual achievement in me. I was top of my class, earned honors, and worked tirelessly, yet my report cards were brushed aside with a muttered good job while my brother's mediocre grades drew applause and gifts. Their favoritism was not subtle, it was deliberate and constant, and it carved deep scars into my sense of belonging. Still, some part of me held on to hope, a quiet hope that maybe one day my father would see me as his daughter rather than his servant, that my mother would step between us instead of pretending not to hear the crack of the belt, that my brother would look at me as family instead of a tool to be used. That hope had kept me silent through 1,000 small humiliations, but Thanksgiving shattered it completely. When my father's belt left blood across my skin while my mother looked down and my brother smirked, the last thread of illusion snapped. The years of toxic favoritism, of endless sacrifice, of serving like a maid in my own home, all of it had led to that single moment where I finally saw the truth as clear as daylight. I had never been part of their family, only a servant dressed in the mask of a daughter. The Thanksgiving beating was not an isolated storm, but the culmination of years of injustice that had accumulated like poison in the walls of our house. Every memory from my childhood seemed to carry the weight of imbalance, as if fate had carved my role in stone and no amount of effort could alter it. I remembered when my brother first got his driver's license, the celebration rivaled a graduation ceremony. A shiny used car appeared in the driveway with a giant bow, my father clapping him on the back, my mother wiping away proud tears. When I turned 16, I received nothing but the keys to the vacuum cleaner and the instruction that girls should focus on home skills rather than wasting money on cars. I remembered one summer when I applied for a scholarship program that would have allowed me to attend a prestigious writing camp. I was accepted, but the deposit money was redirected to pay for my brother's trip to Las Vegas with friends. My father said your brother needs experiences to become a man you can write anywhere. I swallowed the bitterness and stayed home working double shifts at a diner while he gambled away money he had not earned. Another time, I saved up tips from babysitting to buy myself a laptop for school. My brother spotted it the first day I brought it home, and by nightfall it had been claimed as his, with my father declaring that boys needed technology more than girls. I finished high school essays by handwriting them on lined paper, while my brother used my computer to play games until dawn. When I confronted my mother about the injustice, she only shook her head and muttered, "You know your father will not change better to stay quiet than make him angry." That silence, her constant silence, was almost worse than the belt. I began to notice how my achievements were invisible, erased by the shadow of my brother's failures. When I won first place in a regional debate, my father asked why I wasted time arguing instead of learning to cook better meals. When I received straight A's, my mother told me not to brag because it would embarrass my brother. Meanwhile, when my brother scraped by with passing grades, he was showered with praise and promises of a bright future. They called him the pride of the family, while I was told to stop acting superior. The injustice was relentless, small and large, until it became woven into every aspect of life. Even holidays were tainted. On Christmas morning, he received expensive gifts, while mine were practical items like cleaning supplies or second-hand clothes. On birthdays, his cake was 3 layers tall, mine often forgotten until evening when someone tossed a store-bought cupcake in front of me. Each slight was a cut, and over time I carried thousands of them invisible scars that reminded me daily of where I stood in their hierarchy. I was not the daughter, I was the servant, the scapegoat, the buffer for their disappointment. My brother's laziness was excused, my exhaustion criticized. His mistakes were covered, mine amplified. He could borrow money endlessly while I was interrogated for buying a new pair of shoes. And through it all, my father's belt hung on the back of his chair like a constant threat, a silent warning that obedience was mandatory and disobedience would be carved into flesh. Still, the unfairness was not just about chores, gifts, or money. It was about dignity, about being stripped of identity piece by piece until I felt like nothing more than an echo of their demands. The night before Thanksgiving, when I was ordered to iron my brother's shirt while he played video games, something inside me cracked. I pressed the iron too hard and left a faint mark on the fabric. My father saw it and slapped me across the face, muttering that I was worthless, that I could not even manage the duties of a maid. I stood there, cheek stinging, and whispered an apology that tasted like ashes. That was the pattern. My apologies kept their world intact while tearing me apart. By the time the holiday came and I refused to pour his wine, I was already a volcano waiting to erupt. The unfairness had piled so high that it no longer felt survivable. Thanksgiving morning began with the smell of roasted turkey filling the house and the chatter of relatives arriving one by one, their voices bouncing through the hallway with polite laughter and greetings. On the surface, it looked like a perfect holiday, the kind that could appear in glossy magazines, with pictures of golden turkeys and smiling families. Underneath, though, I felt a storm rising, a tension I had carried in my chest since the night before, when my father told me to make sure the house looked perfect for his guests. I cooked most of the meal, scrubbed the dishes, and polished the silverware until my hands were raw, while my brother lounged in front of the television playing football on the screen, his laughter spilling from the living room as if the world existed solely for his amusement. By the time the long dining table was set and the relatives were seated, my back ached and my head throbbed, but I forced a smile and carried the final tray of food. My father sat at the head of the table, beaming with pride as he welcomed everyone. My mother bustled about, filling glasses of wine, but she never looked at me, never acknowledged the hours I had spent preparing everything. When the turkey was carved and plates were passed around, I tried to sink into my chair quietly, hoping to fade into the background and enjoy at least one meal without feeling like a servant. That hope lasted only seconds. My father barked my name and gestured at my brother's empty glass. "Fill it!" he ordered, his tone making clear it was not optional. My brother leaned back, smirk playing across his lips, lifting his glass toward me as if he were a king waiting for service. Heat rushed to my cheeks. Something inside me snapped. I heard my own voice, shaky but clear, say no. The word hung in the air, heavier than the smell of roasted turkey. Conversations froze, forks clattered against plates, and an icy silence wrapped around the table. My father's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed with rage. "What did you say to me?" he demanded. I swallowed hard, heart pounding against my ribs, and repeated louder. "I am not a maid. I will not serve him." My brother let out a mocking laugh that seemed to echo off the walls. "Dad, did you hear that he said she thinks she is above us? She thinks she is too good to serve her family." The words struck like a whip of their own, lashing my dignity in front of every relative. I glanced around the table, hoping anyone would intervene. My cousins stared at their plates. My uncle cleared his throat nervously. My mother busied herself with cutting turkey as though nothing was happening. Not one person stood for me. My father slammed his fist against the table, rattling glasses and spilling gravy across the linen. His face turned red with fury as he rose from his chair, towering over me. "Stand up," he growled. The sound of leather sliding from his waistband cut through the silence, chilling me to the bone. I shook my head, whispered please, but he was beyond reason. The first strike landed across my back, and the pain exploded hot and searing. I gasped, the sound sharp enough to make a baby cousin cry at the far end of the table, but no one stopped him. The second strike tore through fabric and bit into skin, forcing me to stumble forward into the table, knocking over a wine glass. Red liquid spilled, spreading like blood across the crisp white tablecloth, dripping onto the floor in steady rhythm. My brother laughed under his breath and muttered, "Maybe now she will learn some respect." Strike after strike rained down, each one louder than the last, until I collapsed against the chair leg, trembling, humiliated, and bleeding. My breaths came ragged. My body screamed with pain, but worse was the realization that not one person around the table moved to stop him. My mother finally looked at me, but only with weary resignation, not compassion. Her silence screamed as loud as his belt. The room filled with my father's heavy breathing, the smell of food gone sour in my nose, the sound of dripping wine marking time like a metronome. I lay there on the polished floor, cheeks burning with tears and shame, staring up at the faces of relatives who refused to meet my eyes. In that moment, I understood fully that this was not just a punishment, it was a public display, a lesson etched into my flesh to remind me and everyone else of my place. And yet deep inside, beneath the pain and humiliation, a spark ignited. I knew with absolute clarity that this would be the last time I allowed him to break me. Thanksgiving had always been about giving thanks for family, but that night I silently gave thanks for something else. The sudden, fierce certainty that I would not remain their servant forever. When the last echo of the belt faded and the silence settled back over the dining room, I pushed myself off the floor slowly, my body trembling, my back burning with raw lines of pain. My vision blurred with tears, but I could see enough to notice the way every single person at that table avoided my eyes. Not one hand had reached out, not one word had been spoken in my defense. My father sat back down heavily, his breath still ragged, his face flushed with exertion, but also with satisfaction, as if he had accomplished some righteous duty. He picked up his fork and stabbed another piece of turkey, chewing slowly like nothing had happened, as if my blood and humiliation were simply another course at his feast. My brother leaned toward him with a smirk, his voice dripping with arrogance. "She deserved it, Dad," he muttered. "Maybe now she will finally remember her place." He raised his refilled glass of wine in mock salute and took a long swallow, the red liquid staining his lips like a cruel echo of the wine spilled across the tablecloth. My stomach twisted. I turned to my mother, hoping at least she would meet my gaze, show some flicker of compassion, but she only pressed her napkin to her mouth and whispered in a tired tone, "You brought this on yourself. You know better than to talk back." Her words cut deeper than the belt had. It was one thing to endure the violence of my father or the cruelty of my brother, but hearing my own mother blame me, seeing her eyes clouded with disapproval rather than love, confirmed what I had always feared. I was alone, truly, utterly alone. Around me, the relatives shifted uncomfortably. A cousin coughed, an aunt fiddled with her bracelet, an uncle muttered something about not getting involved. They all saw the bruises forming the way I cradled my side, but not one of them moved to stop what had happened or even offer me a handkerchief. Their silence screamed complicity. Their silence told me I was not worth defending. My hands shook as I tried to dab at the blood seeping through my blouse, and the sight of the crimson stains made my cheeks burn with shame. My brother caught the movement and chuckled, whispering loudly enough for me to hear, "Maybe next year she can dress like a proper maid apron and all, so she does not ruin the tablecloth with her clumsiness." Laughter rippled faintly from a few corners of the table, hesitant, nervous, but laughter nonetheless. Each sound lodged into me like a thorn. I sat down slowly, forcing my body to remain upright, though every nerve screamed. I pressed my lips together and forced myself to stay quiet, because I understood something in that instant. They wanted me broken. They wanted me silent. They wanted me to believe I was nothing more than their scapegoat. The betrayal of my father's violence was crushing, But the betrayal of my mother's silence and my family's indifference was a wound that would not heal. I felt the weight of years pressing down on me, the countless times I had been overlooked, dismissed, mocked, beaten into submission. The room spun with warmth from the fire and the scent of food, yet inside me there was only ice, a cold realization settling into my bones. If I remained here, if I continued to bend and endure, I would disappear. They would erase me until nothing was left but the ghost of a girl who once believed she could be loved. The pain anchored me to the chair, but in my heart a small flame flickered, stubborn and alive. In that moment of betrayal, in that suffocating isolation, I promised myself this would not be the end. It would be the beginning. That night, after the guests had gone and the dishes were piled high in the sink, I sat alone in my small bedroom, the walls pressing close around me, the air heavy with the lingering smell of roasted turkey that seemed now like the scent of betrayal. My back throbbed with every breath, each welt a reminder of what had been done to me at that table. But worse than the pain was the memory of their faces. My father's rage had been expected, his cruelty a familiar storm, but my mother's blank eyes and my relative's silence had hollowed something inside me that I had thought indestructible. For years I had told myself they loved me in their own way, that the sacrifices I made, the chores, the silence, the endless apologies were proof of devotion and would one day be repaid with recognition. But that night stripped away the last illusion. The truth was undeniable. I was never going to be seen as their daughter, never going to be cherished as family. I was a tool, a scapegoat, a body to absorb their anger, and a pair of hands to serve their needs. I thought back over the years of bruises hidden beneath long sleeves of dreams deferred because my brother wanted something new, of birthdays ignored, of scholarships stolen. Every memory sharpened into clarity, and I saw the pattern for what it was, a design meant to break me down until I believed I was worthless. I pressed my hand against my bruised side and whispered aloud, though no one could hear enough. The word hung in the air like a declaration, trembling but real. Enough. I realized then that the Thanksgiving beating was not just another night in a long chain of injustice. It was a turning point, a line drawn in blood and wine across the tablecloth. If I accepted this, if I swallowed it as I had swallowed every insult before, then I would be lost forever. There would be no escape, no dignity, no future beyond being their maid, until the day I collapsed under the weight of servitude. I could feel the cold clarity settle into my chest, steadying my breath, quieting the storm of fear. For the first time, I did not cry for what they had done to me. I did not beg the universe to make them change. I did not dream of my mother finally standing up for me, or my father finally softening. I understood they would never change because they did not want to. They thrived on my silence. They thrived on my pain, and if I kept giving it to them, they would devour me piece by piece until nothing remained. A strange calm swept over me as I stared at the cracked ceiling. I was not powerless, not anymore. The bruises on my body could be proof. The whispers I had recorded on my phone when they insulted me could be evidence. The eyes of the relatives who watched and did nothing could be witnesses. For the first time, I understood that the very violence meant to crush me could become the weapon I used to free myself. I closed my eyes and saw myself standing tall no longer, shrinking, no longer apologizing. I saw the possibility of a future where I belonged to myself. That was the moment I knew Thanksgiving had not destroyed me. It had awakened me. The morning after Thanksgiving, I moved slowly every step, a reminder of the bruises carved into my skin, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Pain had given me clarity, and clarity gave me purpose. I sat at my small desk, a battered second-hand piece of furniture shoved against the wall of my room, and opened my notebook where I had once scribbled dreams of college essays and travel plans. This time, the words that poured out were not dreams, but strategy. I listed everything I had, every detail of abuse I could recall, every insult, every strike, every moment of silence that had condemned me. I turned my phone on and replayed the faint audio recording I had captured without even realizing its importance. Days earlier, I had pressed record when my father screamed at me for not ironing correctly, and in the background, my brother laughed about how I would never be more than their maid. The sound was grainy but clear enough to reveal the truth. I saved it, copied it to a hidden folder, emailed it to myself, then uploaded it to the cloud. They had taken everything else from me, but this I would not let them steal. The next step was my body. The welts across my back were dark and swollen, angry red lines that screamed evidence. I pulled on a hoodie and walked slowly to the clinic a few blocks away, each breath a stab of pain, but each step strengthening my resolve. The nurse's eyes widened when I lifted the fabric to reveal the bruises. She asked gently what had happened. I told her the truth for the first time. My father did this. She nodded gravely and took photographs, writing notes, promising the report would be official. For the first time in my life, an adult believed me. I left with papers that turned my suffering into proof, something solid that could not be brushed aside by gaslighting. That night, I emailed the images to myself and printed copies to hide under my mattress. If they tried to destroy one, I would still have another. I remembered the way my relatives had stared at me when the belt cracked across my back, their silence an unspoken confession. They had witnessed it. If forced, they could not deny it. Some might try to lie, but the truth had been too public, too undeniable. I scribbled their names into my notebook, a list of potential witnesses, a reminder that even their cowardice could become part of my weapon. My father had taught me to fear his belt, but now I would make sure the same violence dragged him into a courtroom. Over the next week, I planned in silence, careful not to draw suspicion. I cleaned the house when told, kept my voice soft. Even served my brother a plate of food when ordered, but inside, I was miles away, shaping a new reality. I researched lawyers on the library computer, scrolling through reviews until I found one who specialized in domestic abuse cases. I sent a cautious email, and within a day, I had a reply. The meeting was arranged discreetly in a coffee shop. My hands shook as I explained everything, but the lawyer's calm nods steadied me. She assured me the case was strong, stronger than I realized. Evidence, medical records, witnesses, even recordings, it was enough to open an investigation. She asked if I was ready for the storm that would follow. I thought of the wine dripping onto the Thanksgiving tablecloth, of my brother's laughter, of my mother's cold silence, and I answered, yes, ready. Back at home, I kept my mask in place, but my notebook filled with details, times, words, insults, every scrap of evidence. I even placed my phone carefully on the counter to record dinner conversations, capturing my father's angry tirades and my brother's mocking comments. Each file was a weapon hidden in plain sight. I planned the reveal carefully. Waiting for another family gathering, another moment when they felt secure in their control, would give my counterattack the power of shock. They thrived on humiliating me in public, so I would return the favor. Only this time, the humiliation would be theirs. I practiced in my head the words I would speak when the time came, calm and steady, not as a victim, but as someone who had already won. Each night before bed, I traced the welts on my back and reminded myself that pain had become purpose. They thought they had broken me, but what they had done was sharpen me into something they could not control. My father believed his belt was power. My mother believed silence was protection. My brother believed arrogance was strength. They would all learn they were wrong. My power was knowledge, preparation, evidence, and the unshakable decision that I would never again bow my head in their presence. Thanksgiving had been their spectacle of dominance. The next gathering would be mine, and this time the stage would belong to me. A week later, my father announced another gathering, a belated Thanksgiving dessert night, where neighbors and extended family would join us for coffee pie and small talk. For him, it was a chance to show off the perfect family image once more, to let everyone admire his son and ignore his daughter, and for me, it was the moment I had been waiting for. I moved through the day as if nothing had changed, setting tables, polishing silver, smiling faintly when ordered around. All the while, my phone tucked in my pocket with files ready, my notebook hidden in my bag, and the copies of the medical report secured with the lawyer who promised to come if I called. By evening, the house buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses, the smell of pumpkin pie mixing with coffee, and cider laughter ringing against the walls. My father beamed from the head of the room, my brother played host with an exaggerated grin, and my mother fluttered about pretending to be the perfect matriarch. I waited until the moment was just right, until everyone was settled and the room had quieted into comfortable conversation. Then I stood, my heart pounding steady but my face calm, and I reached for the television remote. The chatter paused as the screen flickered to life. First, there was silence, then the grainy sound of a belt crackling against skin, then my own voice gasping. Gasps rippled through the room as the video played, showing the Thanksgiving beating in all its raw cruelty. My father's arm rising the belt, slashing down my body, crumpling forward. The sound filled every corner of the living room, leaving no space for denial. I turned up the volume and let it run. Some relatives covered their mouths. Others looked at each other in shock. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but no one could pretend it was anything less than abuse. My father leapt from his chair, his face crimson, his voice booming. "Turn it off!" he roared. "That is private, that is family business." His hand shot out to grab the remote, but I stepped back, my voice steady. "No, I said this is truth, and tonight everyone will see it." My brother sneered, muttering that I was a liar, that I had edited the video, but his words were drowned out by the recording of his own laughter in the background, mocking me as the belt landed. My mother's face turned pale, her lips parted, but no words came, and the silence from her was louder than any scream. The room was frozen eyes glued to the screen as the evidence unfolded. When it ended, I turned the television off, but kept the remote in my hand like a weapon. My father was trembling with fury, veins bulging in his neck. But before he could launch another denial, the lawyer I had invited into the crowd stepped forward. She held up a folder. Inside this, she said clearly, are medical reports, photographs of the injuries, and sworn statements. This is not just family business. This is abuse. A murmur swept through the room, neighbors, shifting relatives, whispering, some glaring at my father with disgust. My father sputtered, calling her an outsider, accusing me of betrayal, but the power had shifted. For once, his belt was not enough. I raised my chin, my voice carrying strong. For years, you told me I was nothing, that my only value was serving him, that my silence was my duty. You beat me, mocked me, stripped me of dignity in front of everyone, and they let it happen. But no more. I am not your servant. I am not your scapegoat. Tonight, I am showing the world what you are. My brother jumped to his feet, shouting that I was ruining the family's reputation, that I was jealous of him, that I was exaggerating. But his words sounded hollow, desperate. I pointed at the screen where his laughter had echoed moments earlier. Jealous, I said. Of this? Of being the golden child who hides behind cruelty. You are nothing without their protection. Without me serving you, you cannot even stand. He faltered, his face twisting, and a few guests shook their heads in disgust. My father reached for me again, but this time several neighbors stepped between us, their voices firm, telling him to sit down. The belt hung useless at his side. The silence of years had cracked, shattered into pieces by truth too loud to ignore. I had taken the very stage they had used to humiliate me and turned it into their downfall. And in that living room, in front of every relative, every neighbor, every witness who had once stayed quiet, I stood taller than I ever had in my life. The night after the Thanksgiving beating, I lay in bed, unable to move, without a sharp sting radiating across my back. But in that same pain, a seed of resolve had been planted inside me, and it began to grow with every hour of silence that passed in that house. I knew now that the family I had been born into would never see me as an equal and would never allow me to live with dignity as long as I kept playing my role as the quiet, compliant servant. Dad had made it clear through his whip that resistance would be met with pain and humiliation, but what he failed to realize was that his cruelty had awakened in me the courage to act and the will to fight back. Not with fists or violence, but with something far more powerful, the truth and evidence that could not be twisted or denied. Over the years, I had begun to keep small records, photographs, journals, and even secret recordings, because somewhere deep down, I must have always known that the day would come when I would need to protect myself from their lies. I remembered slipping my phone under the table during arguments, capturing my dad's threats and my mom's laughter when he told me I deserved punishment. I remembered saving screenshots of text messages where my brother demanded money or forced me to clean up after his messes. Back then, I thought I was just holding on to proof for my own sanity, but now I realized I had been slowly building an arsenal. The twist in my thinking came when I understood that silence was exactly what they wanted. The more I suffered in secret, the more power they had. But if I turned the spotlight onto them, if I exposed what really happened behind closed doors, then their carefully built image of respectability in the community would collapse like a house of cards. That thought gave me a surge of energy even stronger than fear. I began planning quietly but deliberately. My first step was to visit a doctor, the bruises on my back still raw and red. I told him I had fallen, but the way his eyes narrowed told me he did not believe me, and when he asked gently if someone had hurt me, I felt my throat close, but for the first time I admitted yes. He asked if I was safe at home, and I shook my head. That conversation became the moment everything shifted because he documented my injuries thoroughly and told me that no matter how much pressure my family put on me, the medical record would exist as fact. Next, I went to a trusted friend from work, someone who had once confided in me about her own troubled upbringing. I showed her some of the recordings I had saved, the harsh tone of my dad's voice echoing through the phone speakers as he shouted that I was worthless and would never be anything. She looked at me with wide eyes and said, "This is enough to make people listen. You are not alone anymore." Those words were like oxygen, and I felt alive again. In the days that followed, I began piecing together a case. I printed photos of bruises from past incidents stored in hidden folders on my computer. I transcribed conversations where my mom mocked me and sided with my brother. I even kept the blood-stained shirt from Thanksgiving folded in a bag like evidence. Slowly, the fear that had once chained me began to transform into determination. I knew there would be risks. I knew they might retaliate harder if they discovered what I was doing. But by then, the greater risk was staying silent and allowing them to continue crushing me. The real turning point inside me came when I looked at myself in the mirror, scars still fresh, and thought, if I let this go unchallenged, I am telling myself I am worthless too, and that I could never accept. So I promised myself that at the next family gathering at Christmas, I would no longer sit quietly at the table and pretend. I would make them face what they had done, not with screams, but with undeniable truth. I would take back control of my story, and no amount of fear would stop me anymore. Christmas came faster than I expected, and with it the heavy atmosphere of forced cheer that had always cloaked our family gatherings. The house was decorated with twinkling lights, the smell of pine and cinnamon candles filling the air, but beneath that polished surface lay the same rot that had poisoned every holiday since I was a child. Normally, I would have walked in with my head lowered, taking my seat in silence and praying the night would end without another confrontation, but this time I carried something far stronger than fear. In my bag, I had a neatly organized folder of photographs, medical reports, audio recordings, and transcriptions. Each piece a fragment of truth that, when assembled, painted a horrifying portrait of what my family had done to me. I arrived early, heart-pounding, rehearsing in my head the words I would speak. When Dad greeted me, his voice dripping with the same forced charm he used with neighbors, I smiled politely, knowing it would not last. My brother swaggered in, tossing his coat onto a chair and smirking at me as if daring me to complain. Mom bustled about handing out drinks, humming carols like the perfect hostess. They all believed tonight would unfold as it always did with me silent and them in control, but they had no idea I was about to shatter the illusion they had built. Dinner began with laughter, clinking glasses, and small talk about work and neighbors. I waited, biding my time until the room grew comfortable and complacent. Then, as plates were being cleared, I stood up, my hands shaking, but my voice firm. I said, "Before we continue, I need to say something." The table fell silent. My dad's brows knitted together, his smile faltering. "What now?" he snapped, as if my speaking at all was an inconvenience. My brother chuckled, muttering, "Here we go." Mom shot me a warning glare. I took a deep breath, pulled out the folder, and laid it on the table. "What's this?" my mom asked, her tone sharp. "Evidence," I said simply. "Evidence of everything you've done to me." I opened the folder and spread out the photographs of bruises, purple marks across my ribs, arms, and back. I played the first audio clip, my father's voice booming through the small speaker. "You're worthless. You'll never be anything, you hear me?" Mom's laugh followed in the background. Gasps rippled around the table as extended relatives leaned in, eyes wide. My brother jumped up, trying to snatch the phone from my hand, but I held it tight. "Sit down," I said calmly, and the authority in my voice shocked even me. Dad slammed his fist on the table, veins bulging in his neck. "You dare bring this filth here," he barked. But I was ready. I lifted the medical report, the doctor's notes clear in black and white. Patient presents with contusions consistent with physical assault. I read it aloud, my voice steady while my hands trembled. Mom stuttered something about me being dramatic, exaggerating. But when I pulled out the blood-stained shirt from Thanksgiving sealed in a plastic bag, the room grew cold. Relatives exchanged horrified looks. One aunt whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. "This is who you really are," I said, looking directly at my parents. "This is the truth behind the perfect image you parade around. You hurt me and laughed about it, and now everyone will know." For the first time, I saw real fear flicker across my dad's face. My brother swore under his breath, looking pale. Mom tried to regain control, saying family matters should stay private, but the tide had shifted. The room no longer belonged to them. Cousins, uncles, and neighbors who had joined the dinner stared at them with disgust. Some stood up and walked away, shaking their heads. Others pulled out phones, recording the confrontation. The power they had always wielded so effortlessly was slipping from their grasp with every second of silence that followed my words. I ended with a promise. From this moment forward, I will never be silent again. If you try to hurt me, I will expose you further. The police already have copies of everything. The folder, the photos, the recordings, they're not just mine anymore. The color drained from my father's face at those words. My brother muttered something about lies, but his voice cracked, betraying his panic. Mom sat frozen, her mask shattered. For the first time in my life, I was not the victim in that room. I was the one holding the truth and forcing them to face it. And nothing would ever be the same again. After that night, nothing remained the same. The dinner had ended in chaos, people storming out and whispers spreading like wildfire across the neighborhood. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing non-stop with messages from relatives, friends of the family, and even distant acquaintances who had seen parts of the confrontation on social media. Someone had posted a clip of my father screaming and my mother laughing, followed by the images of my bruises. It spread quickly far beyond our circle, and for once, the shame did not belong to me. It belonged to them. At work, colleagues who had always known me as quiet and reserved approached me with compassion and respect. Some admitted they had suspected something was wrong, but had never known how deep it ran. For the first time in years, I felt seen not as a burden, but as a survivor. My parents, on the other hand, faced a storm of their own making. Neighbors who used to praise them for their perfect holiday decorations now crossed the street to avoid them. My brother's so-called friends mocked him behind his back, whispering about the video of him sneering while I showed my medical reports. Even at his job, whispers followed him down the hall. My parents tried damage control at first. Dad claimed it was all exaggerated. Mom said I had mental health issues, and my brother called me a liar. But the evidence was undeniable. The recordings, the reports, the photographs, all verified, all consistent. When one of my cousins who worked in law enforcement confirmed their authenticity, any chance they had of regaining control was gone. Behind closed doors, they tried to intimidate me. Late-night calls filled with threats. Anonymous letters slipped under my apartment door, but I was no longer alone. Friends checked in daily, neighbors looked out for me, and the police had already documented the harassment. Each attempt only dug them deeper into the hole they had created. The most shocking fallout came when extended family began cutting ties with them. Aunts and uncles who had once turned a blind eye refused to host them anymore. Invitations dried up. At weddings and funerals, they were whispered about and shunned. Their perfect facade had cracked permanently, and no amount of denial could patch it. I admit it wasn't easy. I battled fear nightmares and the lingering scars of years of abuse. There were mornings I woke up sweating, convinced I'd hear my father's booming voice or feel my brother's hand shoving me down. Therapy became my lifeline, a place where I learned to reclaim my sense of self and untangle the lies they had woven into my identity. My therapist reminded me healing wasn't linear, that justice in public didn't erase private pain, but every session gave me back a piece of myself. The fallout wasn't just external, it was internal too. I began to recognize the ways I had been conditioned to stay silent, how often I still flinched when someone raised their voice, how guilty I felt when I said no. But slowly the guilt was replaced with clarity. I realized the weight I carried had never belonged to me, it belonged to them. Their choices, their violence, their cruelty had created the scars, but I refused to carry their shame any longer. Word of what happened spread further than I expected. A local journalist reached out wanting to do a piece on cycles of family abuse and how silence enables it. At first, I hesitated, fearing backlash, but then I remembered that I had already survived their worst. I agreed on the condition of anonymity. The article sparked conversations at community centers and schools, and though my name wasn't attached, I knew my story was making a difference. Meanwhile, my parents clung desperately to what little dignity they thought they had left. Dad ranted at anyone who would listen about betrayal. Mom played the victim telling sob stories about an ungrateful child. My brother distanced himself from them at times, but never from the lie that he was innocent. Yet the more they spoke, the more pathetic they sounded. No one wanted to hear excuses anymore. The true fallout came months later when they faced legal consequences. CPS opened an inquiry into their past behavior after the evidence surfaced. Financial audits revealed debts they had hidden under the guise of wealth. It was as if every ugly secret they had buried was clawing its way into the light. I didn't have to lift another finger, the truth was dismantling them piece by piece. And while they sank deeper into disgrace, I found myself rising in ways I never thought possible. For the first time, I made choices not out of fear, but out of freedom. I decorated my small apartment for Christmas with lights that glowed warm and soft, not to cover up the pain, but to celebrate survival. Friends filled the room with laughter genuine and healing, and as I looked around, I realized that though the fallout had been messy, painful, and terrifying, it had given me what I had been denied my entire life, a chance to build something real. The silence after the verdict was almost deafening, but beneath it, I felt a tide of emotions colliding inside me: relief, exhaustion, vindication, and an aching grief for all the years wasted under the shadow of cruelty. Walking out of that courthouse, I wasn't the same person who had been whipped bloody and told to serve like a maid. I was someone who had survived someone who had turned pain into strength and shame into proof. Yet survival came with scars deeper than flesh. My ribs ached with every breath, but the ache in my chest was heavier, the weight of a childhood stolen and a family broken beyond repair. Some nights I still heard echoes of that belt in my dreams, sharp cracks slicing through the dark, dragging me back into fear. Healing was not a straight road. Therapy helped me sift through the wreckage of memory, learning that I didn't have to carry blame for the violence done to me, that love twisted into control was never love at all. I learned to speak without flinching, to look in mirrors and see a woman who deserved dignity. My father's downfall didn't erase what had been done, but it drew a line that said, no more. He could no longer rewrite the story, no longer convince anyone I was nothing. I began to build boundaries like walls around my spirit, letting in only those who saw me for who I was, not who my family forced me to be. At work, colleagues who had once pitied me now looked at me with respect, seeing not a victim but someone who had faced monsters and spoken truth. Some relatives reached out hesitant apologies, dripping with guilt for having looked away when I needed them most. I accepted their words, but not their excuses. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a gift I owed anyone but myself, and even then it came slowly, piece by piece. My sister called once, her voice trembling on the line, begging for understanding, blaming our parents for shaping her cruelty. I listened, but silence was my answer, because understanding was not the same as excusing. Some cycles must be broken by walking away. Thanksgiving came again a year later, and for the first time in my life, I set the table in my own home, surrounded not by those who demanded service, but by friends who shared laughter and warmth. We held hands and gave thanks not for perfection, but for survival, for chosen family, for freedom hard won. As I looked around the room, I realized I wasn't defined by the blood I came from, but by the life I chose to build. Still, there was a part of me that grieved. I grieved the little girl who never had a safe lap to crawl into, who thought love meant obedience and silence. I grieved the teenager who wore long sleeves to hide bruises, who bit her tongue so hard it bled rather than speak truth. I grieved the years of trying to earn approval that would never come. But alongside grief was pride. Pride that I had stood in a courtroom and faced down the people who tried to erase me. Pride that I had turned evidence into justice. Pride that the story did not end with my father's whip, but with my voice. Sometimes people ask why I didn't just leave sooner, why I endured so long. The answer is tangled, but at its core is this: because abusers teach you to doubt your worth until escape feels impossible. My journey taught me that freedom is not given, it is seized. And when I finally seized it, I vowed never to let it go. Looking back, I see not just the horror, but the resilience, not just the cruelty, but the strength it forged in me. My father thought he could break me into silence. Instead, every crack became an opening for the truth to shine through. And though my family's legacy will forever be stained with violence, my own legacy will be something different. Proof that survival is possible, proof that justice can be claimed, proof that even in the darkest houses, light can still be found. To those of you listening, maybe with a lump in your throat because pieces of my story sound too much like your own, I want you to know something important. You are not alone, and you are not weak for surviving. People like my father and my sister thrived on silence, on making me believe that speaking up was betrayal, that bruises were shameful, that service was love. But the truth, I learned the truth that carried me through courtrooms and hospital rooms and long nights of doubt, is this: silence only protects abusers, never victims. If you are living in a house where laughter feels like a trap, where love is twisted into punishment, where family means fear, please hear me. You do not deserve it. You never did, and you never will. Abuse wears many disguises. Sometimes it is fists and belts. Sometimes it is words so sharp they leave scars no one else can see. Sometimes it is gaslighting that makes you question your own reality. But in all its forms, it is poison, and you are allowed to walk away from poison. You are allowed to seek help, to call for justice, to build walls that keep the hurt out. People will try to convince you that family is sacred no matter what, that blood ties mean loyalty, that forgiveness means returning to the ones who broke you. I believed that for too long, and it almost cost me everything. What I know now is that family is not about blood, but about love, freely given, safety, freely offered, dignity, never questioned. The people who show up when you are bleeding, when you are scared, when you are doubting yourself, those are family. And you have the right to choose them. Justice is not always perfect. It will not erase the years you lost. It will not stitch up every scar, but it matters. Standing in front of that courtroom mattered. Speaking my truth aloud, even when my voice shook, mattered. And seeing the ones who hurt me finally face consequences was a reminder that no one, not even those who share your last name, is above accountability. To the ones who are still doubting, still wondering if it is worth it to speak, I promise you your story matters. Your pain matters, and your voice, no matter how small it feels, carries power. Do not let anyone convince you that survival is shameful or that endurance means you should accept more. You deserve peace. You deserve safety. You deserve to sit at a table surrounded by people who celebrate your existence rather than demand your obedience. I walked through hell and came out scarred, but I came out standing. And if my story does anything, I hope it reminds you that you can too. Please, if you see yourself in my story, take it as a sign to reach out for help, whether to a friend, a counselor, a hotline, or a stranger who believes you. The first step is terrifying, but it is also the step that saves lives. I am living proof, and so can you be.